Where's the Fallout 2 video, goddammit?
Well, it's on the way, goddammit, but I have something juicy for you instead, and it's in my pants. Nah, just kidding. It's a gossip, and who doesn't love a good gossip, huh? I know I do. Well, I had this conversation with 1UP Plus Entertainment, the developers of Deliverance Reign, a game that has been tagged as RPG and card battler on Steam. Well, it's more like a crude Slay the Spire / Monster Train knockoff, really, but a very entertaining one. And hey, these devs are really nice people, and they are willing to give me a couple of codes to give away for you guys to enjoy. And if the game's final release lives up to my expectations, I might just take them up on their offer. The first good news is that the demo version is already available on Steam and it's free for you to check out right now. So you don't even have to watch this video if you don't want to, but I still would appreciate it if you did. I'll leave a link to the game's demo in the description section down below. And the other good news is that it doesn't suck. Listen, I'm not flexing my YouTube muscles here, but this is not the first small developer who has reached out to me and asked me to try out their game. There have been a couple others, I'll let you know. I just didn't tell you guys about their games because I could not in good faith recommend them to you. But this one is actually pretty entertaining, and if the price is as affordable as the devs promised, and they literally said it was going to be very, very affordable, this might just be the perfect palate cleanser for you to play between the last 80-hour plus titan of a game you played and the next, or while you are waiting for similar, admittedly better but also pricier titles to be on sale. I also kinda wanted to kill two birds with one stone, you know, give you guys something to sink your teeth into, and tell the developers about those things that could use some polish about their game. Because make no mistake about it, this game is rough around the edges and sometimes in the center too, so let's get to it. Deliverance Reign features two completely separate campaigns, which are called Deliverance Reign.
No way!
And while some people have called it two games in one, I think it's more a case of we didn't know how to copycat Slay the Spire and Monster Train at the same time and put all of that into a single game with solid cohesive mechanics, so instead we decided to market the title as a two games in one deal of a lifetime. Oh yeah, and we also like Darkest Dungeon aesthetics, so we decided to copycat that too, but it came off a little bit like discount Darkest Dungeon. Sorry about that and thank you. I know that sounds like pretty horrible criticism, and it is perhaps a little bit unfair. Maybe these guys did want to make two completely separate campaigns from the get-go, but the fact that the game is called Deliverance Reign, and the fact that you get this title screen before you jump into this crude campaign selection screen, and then you start your game of choice, feels a little bit odd and improvised. Take for example Wilder Myth. This game makes it abundantly clear that there are various stories with different settings, characters, and timelines, but the way in which this information is relayed to you still makes it feel like they are parts of a greater common whole. I think everything would have felt less disjointed if you had presented Deliverance Reign as campaigns within the same game, rather than separate games, especially since both games share the same lore. If you had envisioned these games as campaigns, you could have then started with your intro, then repurposed this screen, which as it is serves no purpose at all because players can't choose what to play, they can't fiddle around with configuration options, they can't even quit the game on this screen. You could have turned it into this, giving players the chance to quit, the possibility to access configuration settings, and to choose the campaign they want to play. You could have also added further information about the campaign to add further cohesion to the concept via a hover event, with a delayed begin button to prevent people from haste clicking and missing out on your campaign specific preface. These are minor tweaks that stem out of envisioning these games as campaigns, which I think is how people are going to see it. But I understand if you see it differently. This is just how I would have rather wanted it to be, and I just hope it's useful to you in some way. Also, I think that if your game turns out to be a success, you're going to want to add some other campaigns in addition to Deliverance Reign. So naming your game exactly Deliverance Reign sort of limits your options in that respect a bit, I think. But, are either of these campaigns worth checking out? I'll remind you that 1UP Plus Entertainment are the same guys who brought us Defend the Rook, and if these guys know anything, is how to make fun games. So let's see if that's what we are dealing with today, shall we? Deliverance is without a doubt the most polished of the two campaigns. You play as the good guys of the story, and your goal is to thwart the bad guys' evil plan before it's too late.
No way!
Yes, it is super tropey, but I can appreciate having a clearly defined goal with high stakes for a change, which is something that seems to be in short supply in this genre. This campaign plays very much like Slay the Spire, but there are a couple of things to like about this Me Too effort. For starters, there are several classes that you can play as. The demo allows you to play as the Fanatic, and you can also unlock the Spell Blade, but upon release you will also be able to play as the Stalker, the Death Knight, the Monk, and the Druid. And I'm actually quite curious about these last two. I gave the Fanatic and the Spellblade a spin, and I am happy to report that they do feel different gameplay-wise. The Fanatic seems to be more about attrition and survival, whilst the Spellblade is a bit more about ending the fight as soon as possible. And I can already tell that further into the game there are going to be challenges that will require you to understand the strategic philosophy behind these classes. But as far as I could tell, these classes are nowhere as deep as your classes in Slay the Spire or Tainted Grail Conquest. But this is a demo after all, and the tactical depth of the game's classes in this type of games is something that you tend to discover towards the middle or last third of the game, so it may also be a little bit too early to tell. Unfortunately, this character selection screen also gives you a very early taste of one of the things that needs the most attention and polish in this game in my opinion, and that is the writing. And I'm not even talking about world building or lore, I'm talking about very basic stuff. This is the Fanatic's description, for example. Declaring himself the chosen by the heavens, the Fanatic enters the castle to slay every denizen, good or evil, in the name of his god. The Fanatic uses the power of light to reduce the power of his enemies and build himself up to deliver a mighty blow. He has a lot of healing and can use that to offset self-damage. Now, I understand the need to keep the language simple to make things accessible to most players, but this is just crude writing and crude English, man. Rather than declaring himself the chosen by the heavens, which makes the guy sound like some deranged lunatic yelling at traffic lights. How about something less explainy and more insightful, huh? Something along the lines of, Alaric's evil has not escaped the divine's gaze, nor will it escape its judgment. Thus spoke the Fanatic as he stood before Alaric's castle. With sword in hand and faith in heart, this devout champion will stop at nothing to stem the tide of evil. As for the explanation of what he does, you could go for something like, the Fanatic's unyielding faith emboldens his soul and grants him the power to drain the strength out of his enemies, but this power comes at a cost. This champion of holiness must inflict wounds upon his flesh to exert his punishment, but these wounds are also the source of his unnatural restorative powers. And listen, your game's personality is kinda cheesy and campy, but if I were you, I would own it, and I'd use that to throw an Easter egg or two to put a smile on the faces of those who are surely going to make up a good chunk of your audience, also known as old farts like myself. So how about something like, this champion of holiness inflicts wounds upon himself to exert his punishment. 'Tis but a flesh wound, you hear him yell from time to time as his unnatural healing factor overcomes this minor hindrance.
Just a flesh wound.
The Spellblade's description says, a master of magic and blade, the Spellblade has come to not only prove their worth, but to discover new heretical forms of magic for them to master. I think this is a very good example of why you don't use they or them to refer to individuals. But that's neither here nor there. If you leave the text as it is, I would still advise you to change they for she, especially since you are already referring to the Fanatic as he and to the Druid as she. Now, I'm not a native English speaker myself, so these are very crude suggestions that I just pulled out of my hat, but I strongly recommend that you get a native speaker with at least a modicum of writing talent to proofread these texts and perhaps come up with a suggestion or two on how to fix them. But to be fair, the developers have come to prove that they are willing to stay on top of things. I've only had this demo for a few days and they have already polished a few details here and there.
Good boy.
And the fact that they are willing to put this much effort into ironing out details in a demo version speaks volumes of their disposition. Which is a good thing because there are several other examples of grammar slip-ups here and there that you could definitely look into. Take this text for example. You see a few weaker minions ahead, which is grammatically incorrect. but the other text says you see a powerful group of enemies ahead. I would use this last structure for both types of challenge. It's not only grammatically correct for starters, but using this structure would also add UX consistency. God's assistance. The word God's is missing an apostrophe. You hear a voice in your ear encouraging you. Whew. That is a little too crude, I think. You could have made it more epic, leaner, and grammatically correct with something like, you pray to the gods heed your prayer, choose your boon, or something like that. Again, get a native speaker to proofread your text. I think your game needs this urgently, and I think there is still time. One thing that I like about this Deliverance campaign is that it is quick-paced and to the point. It's all about your cards and combat encounters, and I think this will appeal to a lot of people. You just jump right into it and start playing until you win or die, and I like that, and I like it a lot. I also like that you level up in this game, and this can happen during combat encounters, and I think this is very interesting. When you level up, you get the chance to choose one or many cards to add to your deck, but if none are to your liking, you may also pass on these rewards. And being able to pass on card rewards should be a mandatory feature for games of this genre, regardless of what anyone says. And once or twice during the time I spent with the demo, I happened to get that one card I was needing to make it through the encounter when I leveled, and it felt awesome. And I may be wrong about this next thing, but I got the impression that leveling up didn't depend on how I played the game. It was something that just happened, JRPG style. And if that's the case, I'm not crazy about how it works. Choosing elite encounters over regular fights, for example, doesn't seem to have an impact on your leveling, and there is not much more for you to choose, really. I played twice with a Fanatic, for example. The first time I always chose the easy encounter over challenging or elite fights whenever I could. And the second time around I went for elite encounters whenever I had the choice, and by the end of the demo, in both cases I was level 7. I think risk-reward is as important in card games as choice and consequence in RPGs, and leveling up is precisely the kind of feature in which you want to see risk-reward mechanics at play. While your decks don't seem to have as much tactical depth as they do in Slay the Spire, I was very pleased, impressed even, with some of the card synergies and tactics you could cook up in Deliverance and Reign. This card, for example, a short spear, deals 1 damage, but if you have used other weapons this turn, it deals 4 damage instead. And then you have this card, which grants you Fervor, which increases the damage of weapon cards, but it also returns every weapon card in your discard pile to your hand if it's the last card you play this turn. So the table is served for an interesting little tactic there. You also have this card, which grants you Fervor if you are in a state of grace, and it allows you to draw 3 cards. You then have to discard 2 cards, but you get to choose from any cards in your hand. And there are several cards with talents that trigger when the card is discarded, so there you go. I still greatly miss the feature of a card library like the one you have in Slay the Spire. Here you can browse your card collection and check out how they upgrade, which is very important. This feature allows you to plan your strategies without having to resort to memory or snapshots. But while there are a couple of things missing as far as the Slay the Spire formula goes, there are also a few interesting additions. In my opinion, the most interesting of them is having treasure cards. These cards have huge potential, and I can already see their value in the demo version. These cards can be used as regular cards during combat encounters, but they get purged after you use them once. But they also work as the game's currency, and you use currency to purchase upgrades for your other cards or to unlock champions. And I think that's an interesting way to add greater opportunity cost to the experience. This campaign does not have a map, like the ones you get in Slay the Spire or Darkest Dungeon 2. And not having a map speeds up the pace of the game, which is a good thing, but it also cripples the player's ability to plan ahead and manage his resources more efficiently. For example, there's this one-use card that restores 5 hit points, and maybe you want to save it for when you really need it. But that moment may come right before the end of the first act. And at the end of every act, you get to choose between 3 different boons, one of which is an increment to your health pool and a full heal. So there is the risk of using your precious emergency button card unnecessarily because you don't know how close you are to the end of the act. And except for counting how many encounters you get per act, there is no reliable way of knowing how far into the dungeon you are without a map. The absence of a map also makes the game feel a little bit more random than I would have liked. You get to choose which room to go to every now and then, but since you don't have a map, this choice doesn't feel meaningful or tactically relevant in any way. In Darkest Dungeon 2, for example, you have side objectives, and they generally entail going to X or Y location, and these locations are marked on your map. And because of this, you know exactly what you'd be missing out on in terms of vendors and boons if you choose to pursue this or that side objective. And the same is true of Slay the Spire, Power Chord, and just about every other game in the ballpark. What I mean is that maps are a standard for a reason. It also doesn't help that the few choices that you do have, which boil down to choose room 1 or 2, are not presented in the most appealing way graphically. This is supposed to be a choice of room, but these rooms look exactly the same as cards. You don't need a massive budget to tweak this junction to make it look appealing. Just something like this, a still image with some lore consistent text. And I think a good chunk of your audience would appreciate if you wrapped the challenge in a bit of mystery, rather than straight out telling them what you're up against. Something like, gusts of rancid winds emanate from the door leading to the westernmost room. 'Tis the very stench of evil. You get a bad feeling about this one. For the door leading to the elite challenge. And something like, a curious cacophony of sounds comes from somewhere down the unlit corridor that extends beyond the easternmost archway. You think you can make out the sound of crude weapons clashing chaotically. Something tells you that whoever's making these sounds is probably someone you can best. Again, English is not my first language, and I am pretty sure you could cook up something far better than this, but as it is, it feels a little bit lacking in creativity, or worse yet, a little bit too lazy. Another thing that took me by surprise, and it was a pleasant surprise, was the fact that you can still play cards in your last round after you've beaten an encounter, and right before you move into the next room. And you know what? This may seem like a small detail, but it adds a lot to the tactical aspect of the game, because positive and negative conditions carry over from one fight to the next, and this is
amazing.
This was the secret ingredient behind Darkest Dungeon's feeling of adventure formula, and it works phenomenally well here because you can plan around generating beneficial effects for the next round and clearing curses even after the final round is over. I think this demo version is clever in terms of how much of the game it lets you experience. You get to play as 2 of the classes, one of which you need to unlock, you get to use treasure and weapon enhancement mechanics, and more importantly, you get to the part of the game in which you need to start thinking about tactics, long-term plans, and card synergies. Because in these games, the first few levels are never too challenging. You can usually breeze through the first act by simply having a basic grasp of the game's fundamental mechanics, but that is also not a very good measure of the quality or the level of challenge of the game at all. And I think that's why this demo allows you to play through the first 2 floors of Alaric's castle, and it ends right after you've gotten a juicy taste of the good stuff. So overall, pretty decent stuff. But let's talk about the Reign campaign now. Well, it's a shameless, crude, and extremely low-budget Monster Train knockoff. There's just no other way to put it, unfortunately. Is it fun, though? Yes. Yes, it is. It kept me entertained until the "thank you for playing this demo" screen came out. Could this game appeal to some people in ways in which Monster Train doesn't? Also, yes. This campaign feels painfully bare bones, but I can see how it could be appealing to some people. I'll explain why in a minute. To me, the Reign campaign feels as though the project leader called in the rest of the team for a meeting and said, "Listen here guys, we have no more money or time, but we need to finish the Monster Train campaign right now. So what are the bare minimum mechanics that a Monster Train knockoff can't do without? Because that's all we can afford to put into it." See, in Monster Train there are various support mechanics, for lack of a better term, that add layers of complexity to the game's core gameplay premise. You have card upgrade mechanics, you have purge card mechanics, you can sacrifice creature cards to merge them into other cards, you have non-card permanents, and plenty of other stuff. But these mechanics are clearly differentiated and presented as their own thing in Monster Train. After every encounter, your train arrives to a hellish resting area, so to speak, that's filled with tiny stations that allow you to engage in these mechanics separately. The The discard mechanic, for example, looked like a hole in the ground, and it has its own little interface. Creature card upgrades and spell card upgrades are presented as stations, where there's even a vendor with cards on display. And these stations also have purge card services, but they are clearly separated and differentiated from upgrades. The Reign camping in Deliverance and Reign offers many of these mechanics, to be fair, but they are clumsily bundled together and presented on a single screen, and that gives the impression that they either didn't give two shits about presentation, or they just couldn't afford to put a single penny more into the design and development of this camping. And it's not like these guys don't know how to do this. Take a look at this screen from Defend the Rook. It's a still picture with clearly defined areas that parcel out the things that you can manage. So unit loadouts, for example, have their own space and interface, as do upgrades and spell loadouts. If you did this with that game, why couldn't you do something similar with this one? Also, in Deliverance and Reign, there are no non-card permanents like the artifacts you have in Monster Train. You can't choose a main and a support clan like you do in Monster Train. You don't have a logbook to track your victories or your progress with each clan, or an album to check out the cards you've collected. You also don't have online challenges or customizable offline challenges. And most of the fantastic quality of life features you had in Monster Train, like that little number telling you how much damage friendly and enemy creatures are going to take during the next round, are completely absent here. And I mention all these things because games that aspire to be clones of first-in-class games, they tend to add mechanics to the tried and true formula, not take away from them. Grim Dawn, for example, shamelessly copycats Diablo 2. But it also features multi-classing, shrine mechanics to further boost your skills and attributes, story-related decisions, the ability to rotate the camera and zoom in and out, lots of huge hidden areas for you to explore, and it takes place in an open world rather than on procedurally generated zones. And the same thing can be said of Tainted Grail Conquest compared to Slay the Spire, Pillars of Eternity compared to Baldur's Gate, Phoenix Point compared to XCOM, etc. Hell, even the Deliverance campaign in this very game added a couple of things to the Slay the Spire formula that made me do the not bad meme face. But I can't think of a single thing the Reign campaign adds to the Monster Train formula. Oh, but I can think of plenty of things they left out, and many other things they copycatted in the laziest possible way. Now, Monster Train has been around for 3 years and it still goes for $24.99, and it's meant to be a formidable challenge for people who are dead serious about their card games and about putting their tactical abilities to the test. It has 25 difficulty levels, and at least half of them are no joke. No joke at all, I tell you. But I know that some of the people who are watching this video are not up for this. Some of you have even said so in the comment section of some of the videos. Some of you are like, $25 for an indie card game? Fuck it. Or 25 levels of getting fucked in the ass unless I am some sort of tactical mastermind and a seasoned veteran of Slay the Spire and trading card games? Fuck it. Ain't nobody got time for that. Some of you are going to be like, can't there just be a tactical card-based game that offers a decent but not excruciating challenge? A quick-paced game that I can just jump in and start having fun with right off the bat without having to browse through pages of cards to come up with some strategies to even get a chance of getting halfway through the game? Can't there be a game that does not judge me unworthy unless I spend hundreds of hours trying to unlock its true ending? Well, I very much think that, despite its many flaws, the Reign campaign and, well, Deliverance and Reign as a whole might just be that game. But the way I see it, it'll very greatly depend on that price tag. If I am at my usual levels of overworking and my internet behaves like a proper third world service, which is to say, like shit, this video is probably going to come out the very day the full game comes out. So you'll be able to check the price for yourselves by then. I am going to play the full version of the game, of course, and if I like it, and if the devs don't hate me after this video,
and that's one big if,
I'll ask for those extra codes and let you guys know about how I am going to give them away in a community post or something. Does that sound okay? Well, cool then. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, you must be the developer of this game. But thank you all the same for watching all the way up until now. If you like what you are seeing on this channel, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell to avoid the usual YouTube shenanigans. Share the video, but most importantly, never stop gaming, but don't let gaming get in the way of your hopes and dreams. Bye, everyone.